It's not just that there is one other Jesus being preached. There are many today in these many different concepts. Why does the sonship also matter? Because the fatherhood of God also matters. You see, what all people don't realize, how you impact what you say about the sonship of Christ, if you turn it into a metaphor, spiritualize it, or turn it into a philosophical concept, you are affecting the fatherhood of God in exactly the same way immediately. Because the sonship of Christ and the fatherhood of God are related. If he's a real son, it's because he's a real father. If he's a metaphorical son, he's a metaphorical father. So why does the sonship matter? Because the fatherhood of God matters. It's real. And the other thing is this. Why does the sonship of Christ matter? You know why? Because it actually mattered to Jesus Christ himself. This is not something that we're trying to make and give it some importance that it doesn't have. The sonship of Christ actually mattered to Jesus himself. The sonship of Christ actually mattered to Jesus himself. And to his Father too, we'll see that. But I want to look at how Jesus expressed how important this was. This is so relevant for us today, this conversation. Matthew 16, from verse 13 down to 17. Jesus has a conversation with his disciples. He asks them some questions. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? What are people saying about me? What is being circulated about me among the people? What is being preached and what is being believed about me?" That's the question. And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" Why is this question so important? Jesus here is illustrating the warning, the danger that Paul actually gave to the Corinthians. The danger was this. There's other Jesus being preached. Different views about Jesus exist. And Jesus here was taking a poll, so to speak. He says, look, what are people saying about me? What are the views that are out there that exist? And then he got a variety of answers. Today, we have a variety of answers as well when it comes to Christ. Who is he as the Son of God? Some say, instead of saying John the Baptist, instead of saying Elias and Jeremiah, today, some say, well, he's the eternally generated Son. Or some say, well, he's the metaphorical son. Some say he's the role-playing son. Some say, well, he's the son only when he was born in Bethlehem. He didn't pre-exist that time. So there's different things that people are saying about Jesus. But the concern of Jesus, as far as his true believers is, he turns to them and says, listen, what about you? Who do you say that I am? In other words, can you discern the con? Can you discern the deception? Can you discern between the true and the false? As believers in me, what do you say? So in other words, something now matters to Jesus as far as his true identity being understood by his apostles, by his disciples. Now it goes on. You know the rest of the verse, but let's read it from verse 16. And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven." My Father which is in heaven. A direct revelation from God to Peter concerning the true identity of the Messiah. This revelation is identical to what the Father himself declared publicly at the baptism of Jesus, also at the Mount of Transfiguration. He said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." So Simon Peter here indicated very clearly the faith of the disciples, not just him, but the disciples, the believers in Christ, those who truly accept him, like Paul. This is what Paul would have understood. This is what Paul would have preached, that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, and that means he's the Son of the living God. The two go hand in hand, like we said earlier. The Son of God, the sonship of Christ to the Father, him being the Son of God, is just as real as his messiahship. His messiahship was not a role play, wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't some kind of philosophical process, it was a reality. In like manner, his sonship is a reality. And Jesus was concerned enough and satisfied enough with the answer of Peter. He was concerned enough to ask about it, to make sure the disciples have it right, and to ask about, like I said, and to then answer Peter, like he said later, we won't read it, but he says he's going to build his church on this, and the gates of hell are not going to be able to prevail. In other words, the foundation for the church is based on the identity of Christ being the real and begotten Son of God, which is the foundation for his messiahship. This is the Jesus that Paul preached. So when people say, why does the sonship matter? It matters to Jesus. It matters to the Father. It matters to the true believers. And Jesus wanted to make sure that they understand and they don't catch the different ideas that are there that might seem to honor Christ to a certain degree, a certain measure, but they fall short of the full scope and full reality. Because, people who say Jesus is a prophet, they're seeking to honor Christ. People say Jesus is, is God in his own right, independent of the Father. They're seeking to honor Christ. But all these ways are seeking to honor Christ that are not what God has revealed about his Son. This is what matters. We cannot, this is an important point, we cannot honor Christ more than God the Father himself honors his Son. And how did God the Father honor his Son? The greatest honor, the greatest status is when he revealed to us his true identity at the baptism, in his own words, what he revealed to Peter right here. This is my beloved Son. To Peter, says, thou art the Son of the living God. That's a revelation from God. In other words, the Father himself is lifting his Son to his full and true measure and stature and status. That's what makes Christ divine with the Father. So you can't exceed the Father and think you're going to honor Christ more than the Father. You say, no, Son of God is not good enough. We're going to call him God the Son. We're going to make him God in his own right, independent of the Father. You're actually dishonoring both the Son and the Father. Beware. So the sonship matters. It's important. That's why Paul gave that warning. Practically, I want to make this practical here today. Here's how Jesus puts it in Mark 12 and verse 30. I'll just conclude with some practical thoughts to draw all this together. Because a lot of people ask this question, why does it matter? What's all this about? Here's how Jesus puts it. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. The first commandment is to love God with the whole being. Part of that being is to love God with the mind. You know what that means? The understanding. That's why we said false concepts about God will impact our relationship with him. Jesus wants us to love God with our mind, with our understanding, with our comprehension. To love God is directly related to what concept of God you have. That's why the verse preceding this, Jesus says, the first thing you need to know is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God. In other words, you need to identify God correctly, the one who is going to be the object of your supreme love and worship and that relationship. You need to have the right idea of who God is. Guess what? God is only one. That's why he quoted that verse from Deuteronomy. So this idea that knowing or who we worship is not important or doesn't really matter, especially in the last days, is actually a grave deception. It's a grave deception that we really need to watch out for. Loving God is not just about theology, okay? To love God, as Jesus indicates here, is not a theological position or a theological interpretation. Loving God with the heart, mind, soul, and strength is actually a way of life that impacts your actions, your behavior. It stems from how you relate to God here, how you understand him will be revealed in your behavior. In the mind. That's what it means to love God with all your mind. Think about it. What does Jesus mean? He says, you love God with all your mind? That would involve some kind of understanding, an understanding of God, who he is, an understanding of his Son, who he really is. That's why it matters. That's why there is actually a deception about this. The fact that so many deceptions exist about the sonship of Christ should be evidence enough for anyone that sonship does matter. Why would Satan manufacture so many different ideas and so many controversies and so many oppositions when it comes to the sonship of Christ? There's so many varieties. Why? Because it matters, and Satan knows this. It matters all the way to the end as well. Notice in Revelation 14 and verse 1, and I looked and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. All the way to the end, the true worshippers, known as the 144,000, they have the Father's name written in the forehead. Now they're standing with the Lamb, that's the Son of God. And the description here is very interesting. I don't want us to miss that. It says they have his Father's name written in their forehead. It doesn't say they have the Father's name. It says they have his Father's name. In other words, they know that this is the Son of God, and they have his Father's name in their forehead, in their understanding, in their mind. They love God with all their mind because they understand and they know who they worship, and they stand with the Son, who they know to be the Son of God. They have his Father's name. That's a real Father. Okay, so what you get from this point is that's a real Father. That lines up exactly with what Jesus declared about himself, with what Paul preached about Jesus in the verses that we covered, and with what's revealed in the whole New Testament when it comes to Christ. So these 144,000 are preaching, believing the same Jesus that Paul preached, This is the true identity that they have of Christ. It impacts their behavior. It impacts their actions. It impacts their life. They have a connection with God in such a way that they stand through this whole time of trouble and they end up standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion. Quite simply, they know the Father and the Son. This is what we're talking about here.